Okay, we're going to pick back up
Maybe.
in Genesis 29. And Jacob, basically, in the end of 28, from verse 10 on down, he has this encounter in a dream with the Lord. And he sees the ladder and people going up and down. He's traveled, he's going from where he's been down in the Negev all the way back up to Haran, which is about 630 miles. He's traveled about 70 miles at this point when he lays his head on a rock, and then he has this vision, and he has this encounter with God where God basically restates the blessing that he'd given to Abraham here to Jacob, so that he has it in a dream. And then he ends his thing by, in verse 20, when he got up in the morning, he took the stone and placed as a support for his head. He set it up as a memorial stone, poured oil on top of it. Then he named the place Bethel. But previously, the name had been the name of the city of Luz. Jacob also made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, and give me food to eat and garments to wear, I will return to my father's house in safety, and I return to my father's house in safety. Then the Lord will be my God, and this stone, which I have set up as a memorial stone, will be God's house, and everything that you give me, I will assuredly give you a tenth. Jan sort of posed a question about if that's a conditional response on his part, and I think, the best way for me to get clarity on that, it was a dream. And so how do you basically get a confirmation that this is God speaking to you, other than the reality of what plays out in your life? That he does bless you, he is with you, you do have food for your journey, you are successful in what it is you're trying to do, and God is blessing you along the way. And we begin to realize the blessing that God gives to us. He's made all kinds of promises to us if we will be his children, if we will look to him and follow after him. And we find those promises being reinforced in our lives as we realize the blessings that he's giving to us and the answers to prayer that we've petitioned to him. And so, we find him now as he's set out on his journey in verse 1 of chapter 29. He went to the land of his people. Now, he's basically about 2 days maybe 3 days into his journey and gone 70 miles. He's got to go more than 600 miles to reach his goal. He's probably without attendants, and he's probably on foot. From what we don't have what did Abraham send when he sent for Isaac to have a bride? 10 camels and his primary servant and attendants and all this stuff. And now we find Jacob traveling in a similar vein. He's escaping from his brother's threat, his potential wrath from Esau, and his threat that, once Dad dies, I'm going to kill him. And it's going around the camp. He's basically made it very clear that for having stolen the blessing, that was his intent. Mom gets with Isaac and says he shouldn't marry one of these Canaanite women. He needs to go back to Haran and find a family member, someone. And so that's the journey he set out on. Jacob set out on this journey, went to the land of his people in the east. He looked and saw a well in a field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it, because they watered their flocks from that well. Now the stone on the face of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, they would roll the stone away from the mouth of the well and water the sheep. Then they would put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. And so this apparently was a common practice, and they were going to wait until all the flocks arrived. You've got shepherds with 3 separate flocks already there. And they're waiting by the well. And Jacob comes on this scene, and he says to them, "My brothers, where are you from?" And they say, "We are from Haran." Finally, he's arrived. He's been on the road for, I don't know, a month at least, probably, to go 600 miles. And he's finally arrived. And so he said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" Now, Laban was actually the son of Bethuel. But back in chapter 24, Bethuel is mentioned once, and then everything else is Rebekah's mother and her brother. And so Bethuel is not even referenced here. He's actually the grandson of Nahor. Do you know Laban? It would be the descendant of Nahor, but it's really his grandson. And they said, "We know him." And he said to them, "Is it well with him?" So they've obviously gotten some reports back and forth. We've seen that in the past where some information is being passed from party to party as to how people are living. We saw that playing out in the time frame with Abraham sending his servant to get a wife for his daughter Isaac. So there's some information going back and forth, but he is inquiring of them, "How is he now?" And they said, "It is well. And here is his daughter Rachel coming with the sheep." So now he's been traveling all this time. He finally gets to his destination. He encounters these people. He's in the right, at least, realm of where he needs to be. And then the daughter of his uncle comes leading out her sheep. She's a shepherdess, as it were. And so this is not all that uncommon. As we look forward to the time of Moses, when he's fled and he's gone to Midian, who does he encounter out there as he arrives? There's some shepherds out there. There's the daughters of the priest of Midian, Jethro. The daughters of Jethro are there, and they're actually being forced out by the other shepherds. Won't let them water their flocks. Well, Moses intercedes. So it wouldn't be that uncommon for these fairly prominent women in the household of their fathers to be responsible for a certain quantity of the sheep. That would be their responsibility. And if you've ever researched anything about shepherds and sheep, the sheep are going to be responding to that person. They're going to know that person's voice. They're going to follow that person. They're going to basically cluster around that person. And I ran into a fellow one time, I heard him speak, and he thought he was going to be a shepherd. And he had no idea how difficult that prospect was and how much it took to win over that flock that he was taking over. And so we find him then, her coming up, and that she's, sorry about that. Verse 7. Look, Rachel is coming with the sheep. He said, "Look, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered. Water the sheep and go and pasture them." He's a shepherd. He knows his business. He's been handling things. He's 84 years old, and he's been handling things for his father for all this time. And so he knows what it is and how you're supposed to handle this situation. So what was the directive here was, why wouldn't those shepherds have just moved that stone and watered their sheep? Can you think of any reason why they might not have taken on that action?
Well, if it was just other women too, it might have been too heavy.
No, well, these.
It's heavy for once.
I assume that he encountered men on his when he got there. My brothers, where are you from? And so he's. My thought is, okay, maybe it's Laban's well, and they're not going to move Laban's rock until his sheep are there, or it is somebody else's property, and they have paid for the right to have their sheep watered there, but they're under certain restrictions. You can't just move that stone. You've got to wait, and then, so now we've got Jacob coming on the scene, and he's basically saying, what's the delay? It's high day. Water these sheep and go and pasture them. That's where they need to be. They need to be out grazing at this point. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered, and they roll the stones from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. So you've got multiple shepherds there that are waiting for somebody to roll that stone away, to move that stone. And they are restricted from doing so. They don't say we physically can't do it. They just say we cannot until all the flocks are gathered. So there's a procedure in place as to how they're going to deal with these flocks as they come to gather. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, and she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, and the sheep of his mother's brother Laban, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of his mother's brother Laban. So he's going to take some initiative here. Regardless of what the procedure is, regardless of what all these other crews are waiting for, it's time to water these sheep. This woman's come all this way, and there's a lot of the commentators are thinking this is a Herculean effort, that somehow he's superhuman strong, inspired by love, and he's able to move this stone. Well, I don't buy it. I think that any one of those shepherds could have struggled enough to move that stone far enough to water the flock of the sheep.
Yeah, well, it has to be accessible.
Yeah. And so the reality of the situation is he's not going to go and observe whatever this local restriction is, and it might be the fact that this is the last flock that was required to arrive before they could move the stone. Because they're saying, we have to wait for all the flocks. And that may have been the fourth one, the one that was required for the stone to be moved. Whatever the case is, Jacob takes initiative, and he rolls away the stone. And Jacob kissed Rachel and raised his voice and wept. Can you imagine how relieved he is at this point? After traveling all that time, he's literally fled, fearing for his life, from his brother who's threatened to kill him. He's traveled in the wilderness for all this time on his own. He's finally arrived, and here he is, and the first ones he encounters know his uncle, and then his cousin basically comes walking out, and she's a beautiful young woman. And there's a lot of questions about, is it appropriate for him to kiss? And, there is this Eastern kissing culture. I don't know how many of you people have been kissed on both cheeks. I've had a few encounters like that. And that's different for us. I was a little uncomfortable at the time.
Well, the Maasai spit.
Oh, this is
all around your face.
Yes, the older Maasai women, if they're going to bless you, they literally spit all over your face.
Yeah.
That's the blessing of the Maasai. And I was not blessed, fortunately, but I watched somebody else being blessed.
You'll have to make another trip down there.
I know. But when I heard that was, one of the family traditions, the old family traditions. So within this culture, it would not be extraordinary, but he's just, this weeping is probably just this tremendous release of, I'm here, and God has blessed me. And, all that I had asked for, I've had food, and I've had safety, and I've traveled, and I've reached my destination, and now I'm, And so he wept. Jacob told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. So we've got this scene playing out. Now, how different is this from when when Rebekah, basically that wooing situation there. We have the servant coming with 10 camels loaded with goods, attendants for the servant. We've got him encountering Rebekah at the well. Rebekah draws water for him, and then they get together and they negotiate out the prospect of a marriage arrangement, even before they will sit down and have their supper. But all this wealth is being transferred at that point from Abraham to Nahor, basically, to where there's this distribution of wealth to Laban and the mother, actually, not to Nahor. But so that's what's happening when Isaac is getting his bride. We're in a different situation here. Sounds like Jacob has arrived with the shirt on his back. And he wanders into the camp. And he's basically this relation. So when Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So they're obviously still herds people, but he has a local house, as it were. They're not just living in tents. So it's a more established household. He's actually fairly wealthy. His wealth is going to increase significantly from his association with Jacob. Embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Then he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, "You certainly are bone of my flesh." And he stayed with him for a month. So all these things. So one of the things that's going to happen when anybody travels from Abraham's or Isaac's location to back up to Laban's location is all the news. They're going to get an update on what's happening with the family, what's happening with this, what's happening with that. And my sense is that Jacob probably even goes to the extent of explaining that he got the blessing, that he's now the head of the household, but he had to flee. And the reason I'm in these torn garments after traveling for months and alone is I had to flee for my life. But I am the designated heir. My father's incredibly wealthy, but I am, and I'm destined to inherit. But this is my circumstance. And so, and he stayed with him for a month. So the news was transferred. We don't know exactly how much was disclosed, but I have a feeling that Jacob was probably fairly straightforward with his uncle. Just said, "This is who I am and this is why I'm here. My mother and father agreed that I should come to this land to find a wife from this family." And it happens that he has 2 daughters. So Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? You've been living with me for a month, probably helping out with all the duties that are required in the administration of a fairly large estate of herds." And we don't know specifically that he has the camels and the other things that were referenced, but probably he's got a variety of different herds that are being handled. He's been there, he's been working. "Tell me, what shall your wages be?" So Jacob, as he comes in, He doesn't really have anything except probably what's the clothes on his back. But he starts working right away. And after a month of basically contributing to this household, and in a very significant way, showing skill, showing ability, then Laban says, hey, you need to be paid if this is going to happen. So what shall your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in figure and in appearance. That eyes were weak. There's a number of different thoughts with regard to that. As to, she didn't have the sparkle in her eyes that Rachel had. My sense is she had poor vision, probably, and she probably was not quite as physically appealing as her younger sister. She was the firstborn, and, anyway, now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. That's an indentured servitude where he's going to be living in the household. He's going to be a material part of the household. He's going to have provisions and housing and clothes and the basic necessities of life, but he's not going to be enriched with money or resources, particularly just in the process of living there and working. I'll work for you for 7 years for your daughter. I could not bring 10 camels loaded with stuff, but I can bring myself, and I can work for you for 7 years. So that's his idea of how he's to be paid. So he's anticipating he's actually going to be there at least 7 years. Yep.
So is he thinking, God's going to bless Laban because I'm here, so he's going to get richer.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm here.
Yeah, it's a win-win situation for everyone. And while that's his proposal, so he anticipates that when his mother said, go away for a little while, and I'll call you when it's time to come home. I'll tell you when it's time to come back. Her anticipation, Rebecca, when she sent him off, was it'll just be a little while. When Esau calms down, I'll bring you back. Jacob, right off the bat, says, I'm going to be here for 7 years, and I'm committing to service for 7 years. Right off the bat. So he doesn't have this unrealistic expectation of how long it's going to take Esau to calm down after having his birthright stolen. And so, anyway, so that's the deal. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than give her to another man. Stay with me. So they've basically done an engagement, a proposal, a marriage contract, which will not be fulfilled for 7 years. But meanwhile, he's there and he's working and he's committed to that. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him like only a few days because of his love for her. Whew. That's got to be some significant love. The nice thing about that housing and living arrangement was they got to spend a lot of time together. And that extended courtship was apparently something that when he finished his work for the day and he came home and there was food at the common table and he was able to spend time with his future bride, that it was just, hey, doesn't get better than this. It's like no time at all. And this service that I've put in, things don't always go quite so well.
But their second 7 years didn't go by so fast.
Yeah, he was actually only 77 when he got there, and he's 84 at the point where he finally comes to, in verse 21, and Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, my time is complete. He's been counting the days. He knows when the season was and when he got there and when they shook hands on this agreement, this commitment for that. So Laban all the people of the place and held a feast. Now in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and Jacob had relations with her. Laban also gave his female slave Zipporah to his daughter Leah as a slave. So it came about in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, "What is this that you've done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served with you? Why then have you deceived me?" But Laban said, "It is not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the firstborn. Complete the first week of this one, and we will give you the other also for service, which you have served for me for another 7 years." So, complete the week. What does that mean?
You're married to Leah,
Yeah,
and yeah, you stay with her for.
there is a 7-day marriage ceremony set in as a pattern for those people. The marriage was at least a full week of dedication to that couple, as it were. Some of the later Jewish traditions were the young men were exempt from military service for 1 full year after marriage. And so there's been these traditions that for this 7 days, that's an exclusive time frame for this young couple. At the end of the 7 days, he gets to marry Rachel. So now, in less than 2 weeks, he's got 2 wives. But now he's basically committed to work another 7 years for the second wife. So,
Which he didn't bargain for, but.
no. But when you look at all the dynamics of that, there had to be some conversation that went on between Laban and Leah. And I don't know how they pulled it off without Rachel having some knowledge of what was going on.
The same way that his mother pulled off the other thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Jacob.
She made her look like.
Jacob participated in a little deception earlier.
Yeah.
So it's coming back on him.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you kind of lied to your father and said that you were Esau, and now you've been tricked, as it were. So he ends up with 2 wives and another 7 years of service.
And she was wearing Rebecca's clothes, and it was really dark. And
Yeah,
And that's for
had hairy back hands.
You have to go around, goatskin around her hands.
Yeah.
small sheep.
And we guys. No, it's strong eyes. But that's the,
I wonder how the sisters got along with each other.
yeah, I was
that's-
wondering, 7
They
years.
did not.
it becomes more problematic for the sisters.
In today's times, it would be a reality show.
Oh yeah, we would be watching week to week. What's happening next?
Out in Utah.
So okay, so complete the week with this one, and we'll give you the other one also for the service which you shall serve with me for another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week, and he gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife. So now he's got 2 wives, and he's living, don't know exactly what the living arrangements were, but he's probably now got his own housing arrangement, whatever it is, with his 2 wives. Laban also gave his female slave Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her slave. So now interestingly, sometimes the wealth of a situation, and again I'll reference the Maasai, the wealth of the Maasai person was typically gauged in the amount of stock they had, how many cows and goats and things, and how many wives they had, and how large was their household. So it wasn't unusual for, in the remote regions of traditional Maasai land, for a 60-year-old man to have his 3rd wife be a 13 or 14-year-old girl. And have 300 cows, but still living in a mud and wattle hut. that's basically cow dung and mud. And that's how they're living. But his wealth was in the number of the size of his herd and the number of wives. That's how that wealth was determined. And so what we've got is Jacob going from being just a servant in the household to being a married man with 2 wives and 2 slaves. And so his basically position is significantly changed for this next 7 years. So we're going to start into, we've got a few minutes, we're going to start into chapter 31. Before we do, we've got 2 more weeks after this where we're going to be in the Patriarchs. The last Sunday in May, the 29th, the last Wednesday in May, the 29th, is a song service. And so we're basically going to have 2 more after tonight. What we're going to see is things fairly quickly turn from Jacob. We get into chapter 37, and we start to have a significant amount of information about Joseph and the families. So as we go forward, we're going to be wrapping things up without spending a lot of time on Joseph. We'll track Jacob pretty much through the end of his life, which we jump all the way to chapter 46 and 47 to do that. But we'll go ahead now and just start again in 31. Now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb. But Rachel was unable to have children. Leah conceived and gave birth to a son and named him Reuben. For she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. So Jacob's affection has clearly always been focused on Rachel. She's the babe. And Leah's obviously having relations with Jacob because they conceive a child, but she's just not loved.
Her eyes don't sparkle quite the same.
That's right. That's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the situation. So now, one of the things that you find again and again in the scripture is the idea that a woman's function was not fulfilled unless she could give a male child to carry on the life. And it was very prominent in that culture. And Leah's concept is, okay, now that I've given birth to a son, he will love me. Because the Lord named him Reuben, she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and gave birth to a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved. She's still unloved after having produced a male offspring. He has given me also this son also. So she named him Simeon. When she conceived again and gave birth to a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi, and she conceived again and gave birth to a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped having children.
Well, from love to attachment to you're not even in the picture, just God.
So now there's 4 little boys running around the household. There's 2 women, wives, and Leah's feeling blessed by the Lord because she has the children, but feeling empty because she doesn't have a husband's love. And this is going to create a problem between the 2 sisters. But, Genesis 30, where are we time-wise? We've got 4 minutes. So now, when Rachel saw that she had not borne Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I'm going to die. That's the level of you know, the sense of a person's identity, who you are, and what it is that's going to validate you as a person.
Well, even further than that, it's got to be compounded by having a second wife that you're living with and having that, let alone it being your own sister.
You know?
Like, that's a whole other level of sibling rivalry.
Yeah. But for a person in that culture, a part of their basic identity was for me to be whole, is to bring forth children. Then Jacob anger burned against Rachel. Whew. And he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of your womb? Then she said, here, is my female slave, Bilhah. Have relations with her so that she may give you birth on my knees so that by her I too may obtain a child. So we've seen this happen play out once before with Sarah and Abraham. And that didn't always go so well. But her solution was, if I cannot give you, then my slave can be my surrogate, as it were, or my substitute. What offspring she produces then would be credited to me. So it's a tough situation. Foreign to our concept. So now he not only has 2 wives, he's got what would be the equivalent of a concubine, this slave who's going to be Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me and has indeed heard my voice and given me a son. She's taking credit for the son of the slave. And thinking, that's God's answering that prayer that I've been, Therefore she named him Dan. And Rachel's slave Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. So Rachel said, with mighty wrestling I have wrestled with my sister, and I have indeed prevailed. And she named him Naphtali. She couldn't conceive. Her slave giving 2 children, 2 offspring, male offspring to her husband was enough for her to feel vindicated from the conflict with her sister Leah. It's not a pleasant story at all. It's a hard situation to try to, recognize the turmoil that was in that culture, in that situation, living in those circumstances. And ultimately, there are going to be 6 more kids out of them.
It's like a contest.
Yeah.
Exactly, the contest.
Just
Yeah.
gonna keep escalating.
Yep. So we're going to pick up again there next week.